So we are here on unceded Secwepemc territory, and rather than simply acknowledging that that is where we are, we also want to do a little more than that. Our politics, one of the wonderful things about being here is that our politics align really, really closely with the independent politics of the Secwepemc Nation. And it's an amazing opportunity to express solidarity both by supporting the Tiny House Warriors, thank you for wearing the shirt, by the way, the Wild Salmon Caravan, but also in the way that we approach stewardship and the land, and to operate within that context. And so that is the context in which we operate, that in solidarity with the First Nations who are here. And we thought we'd actually just give you a very quick intro to us. So you want to start there, Darlin?
Sure. So we're approximately 20 years old as a business, as Crannog Ales, and Left Fields has started at 2000, but our backgrounds are such that we have been politically active since before we knew each other, and I'm a first generation graduate of activism in our family. So I have no pedigree in this whatsoever, except for I think skipped a generation. My dad was not really political whatsoever, and apolitical at that. But certainly my grandfather and my family was before that, and so we've been activists both on this continent and the old world as well, doing things. And then just recently, we've been working with our neighbors and friends that live locally, and also within food politics as well, on the federal level as well as the local level, and trying to change people's minds that way. And I think we're now in a process of showing people by example more so than actually on the front lines all the time, but that still happens as well.
And my background is farming primarily. I grew up on a farm. It's now been most of my life, actually. The bonus about getting older, things just suddenly sound so much more important. I don't know. And I have to say, I am pedigreed. I'm a red diaper baby. My first political act was an anti-nuclear march before I was born. So, and I've been immersed in food politics, again, pretty much all my life, with my parents' work with the Ram's Horn, my father's writing, with work on the food policy councils across the province and nationally, and with work with farm folk, city folk. And starting off, and as I was so wonderfully reminded, actually, my introduction to politics in BC was anti-poverty and anti-ownership politics, anti-property ownership politics with the Francis Street Squats in Vancouver. Which really ties into a huge piece of what we want to talk about, actually. So it's awesome to have that as a slight little starting point. We started the farm in '99, opened the brewery in 2000. The farm is now a cooperative. The brewery remains a corporation, which will lead us into a discussion about things that you learn to live with in order to function in society, and the things that which battles you fight and what you try to work on. But we can carry on with that discussion. I think for that, the discussion is really around what you're willing to compromise on and what you're not willing to compromise on. We had to have a corporation in order to start the brewery because the liquor board doesn't speak any other language. So in order to do that, that was the road that we had to go down. And we've spent 20 years having these discussions about how weird it is to not actually believe in property rights and ownership, but to actually have a corporation. It's really weird, but it's actually great because what it does is instill and continue to start those discussions about what's really important. And for us, the paper model of ownership is not anywhere near as relevant as what you do within that and how you actually function in your lives. So it gives us a starting point, actually, to continually challenge ourselves to try to do something a little bit better, and to try to address our ethics in the little things that we do as well as within those bigger structures. And the main thing, of course, is that what we're trying to do, and everybody in this room, all the faces that I recognize, that what we're trying to do is to create a parallel system based on ethics instead of profit. And I know that that's why you're here, so I know that's what you're all about. And we're going to try to skip through our part of the discussion so we can actually have a big go around. But remembering that the bottom line is that we need to make capitalism, in particular the rapacious, theft-driven version of capitalism that we have, obsolete by building something that's decent.
I'd also say about the notion of commerce is something that there is part of the capitalism that taints us. But that's when we're talking about work-life balance, we really hate this because we think that what you do as a living makes more sense. Where if it's not commerce, that has nothing to do with capitalism whatsoever. So everything we're doing, all our relationships in our sphere of influence is definitely not capitalist. And we don't even, it's not even a democracy, it's all consensus-based stuff. Mm-hmm. You don't talk to your family and have votes all the time. You talk about things and make sure that everybody kind of agrees with what's going on. To a degree, when they get to a place, when your kids get to a place where they can actually communicate with you and formulate an argument that makes sense. But otherwise, basically, we don't vote on things in any other way, and so to even think of ourselves as being in that system is a bit of a misnomer.
Did you want to talk about growth cap and sufficiency?
Yeah, sure. First I wanted to talk about the understanding of what, going to the capitalism thing that I touched on, understanding the needs that what money is for, and not buying into the notion of accumulation for accumulation's sake. Money is only promissory notes to get something else. If you base your life upon just hoarding things as they would on a Dragon's Den or something, the big dragon would sit on a big pile of money and stuff. That's abhorrent. That doesn't make any sense at all. You don't accumulate money. You get what you need, and want for that matter, but you don't sit upon a whole bunch of things whilst other people do not have part of that. Mm-hmm. And we really seek to bring the community with us, not hoard it all ourselves and become the person who can only afford the lunch and eating by ourselves.
So within the business structure, we basically have a flat payment structure, so everybody's getting paid the same. In fact, for the longest time, still are the least well-paid people in the company because we own it, and we still have that ownership thing sitting on our heads. And so the pay differential is as flat as we can make it. Because everybody's work is valuable, and there's nothing that can destroy equity as quickly as paying somebody more than somebody else. So it's a very simple way of dealing with that, but it's definitely a really important one. And Brian, you were also talking about bringing the community along. One of the things that we both like to talk about is involvement in the community. You know, you hear big corporations talk about giving back to the community, and they have their day where they get to donate to some charity, which is usually in their own name and something that they've set up as a tax shelter for themselves, where they can get all the PR, the good press for being such great corporate citizens and donating everything. Meanwhile, they're spending the rest of the year pillaging. And for us, the concept and what seems to make sense for us is that instead of doing that, support your community all the way along. So instead of taking and then doling it out again, and then taking credit for it, simply bring people along with you as you go. And if what you need to do is to make donations to specific people, have that as part of your core expenses. So it's not something that you consider afterward, as this is what you do with the cream. It's part of the necessity of your function. So that again, you are acting more as a member of a community as when you're being a corporation, instead of taking away and then giving back the little bits that you want to.
That's true.
Can you give an example persons or organizations in your community.
How do we do that?
Flesh that out a little bit, how that works. I heard the piece about making it part of your core expenses, but I just kind of don't have an example.
I'd say, well, T-shirt's a good example, right there. We don't get, when we give to the Tiny House Warriors, and we make sure that we work really hard for our money and the resources that we can gather and things, and to squander it on something like a big pharma. If we decided to pay into the Pink Ribbon campaign or something, and that wouldn't be doing ourselves a service. But if we really believe in a cause or something, or we want to further something, we will make sure that we funnel a certain amount of money towards that cause. If we won't sponsor an Ironman kind of competition. We don't sponsor sports.
Yeah.
For one thing. We think it's important to do social justice issues, and that basically keeps it within our intentional community, because we feel that all the ethic, altruistic type companies and people who are doing good things we need to share our resources with them. And be it a cash thing, then that's what we're going to do.
Well, and so part of that would be choosing who you're purchasing from. So deliberately choosing people who either are working on beginning a business or somebody who's local who can use that in a more effective way, and maybe paying more for it, whatever that is, rather than simply going to buy the cheapest possible thing. So constantly trying to work with local artisans would be part of it. And then for those things where really it is a sort of more donation relationship, to essentially say, well, this is really important to us, and if we can put this much money aside every year to donate to this particular organization, and for us, whether they're officially a charity or not is irrelevant, because an awful lot of really, really important projects are not actually allowed to be charities. So that's not part of the consideration. But the calculation of how much money that can be comes in before we start thinking about what's traditionally called profit. And I think I would have to add into that for us, that the concept of, well, we have a really hard time with the concept of profit. So I think for us, and the limits to growth, if I can go back to, I'm going to steal some of what
we're going to
you're
go
saying.
into that growth thing.
Well, maybe we can go there first and then come back to what you're talking about, Alicia? Okay.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a picture of what you're talking about.
Okay, great. Do you want to go on to the growth cap then?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand most businesses in operation, at least in the Western world, are based on a constant growth pattern. And now that doesn't really work on a finite Earth. We felt uncomfortable about the idea. The whole notion of monopoly is abhorrent. It just doesn't make any sense at all. That should not even be a term. And we think that growth. We have something we call a growth cap strategy, and so basically we get to a point where our bills, our innovation, our employees, our even vacation, because it's not always about needs. It's still the stuff that our wants are still being taken care of. But beyond that, all the rest of that is ego-driven, and we don't need to do it. And first of all, we don't need to work as hard to do something else for somebody else, as in the liquor board. We only need to produce so much beer to make sure that our lives are complete, and all the people we touch and employ and all those kinds of things, they are taken care of. And anything beyond that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. So we're trying to make sure that other people get this idea again, and we had a great example because we live on a farm, we have a well. We can only take so much water from that well before it goes dry. It's a deep well, there's lots of it. But we could, if we kept on growing, we could extinguish that. And also too, we grow a certain amount of hops for our year's supply. Anything beyond that, what would we do with it? We already have a job, so why would we put another job on? We have a few jobs, selling the rhizomes and selling the beer and the wool. and all this stuff. So we already have that. We're not looking for another piece of commerce. We're just looking to make sure that we can maintain something and only take our share of things. I feel really bad if somebody, and I do feel bad that we have access to so much water, and but on the other side of it, I don't feel bad because we're using it wisely and reusing it. And a lot of people come to us and we'll do the tour, and we tell them that so our water usage in the brewing industry is huge, but doesn't have to be. Most breweries are 7-to-1 ratio, water to product ratio. We have a 2-to-1, and that's only in the environs of the brewery itself. As soon as it hits that brewery wall, that water that is so-called waste, we reuse again for agricultural purposes. So net effect is that it essentially is a zero waste operation that way. And same thing with all our things. We don't view things as a waste kind of thing. So we're reusing these things. We won't get more animal feed from a certified organic source all the time because we have spent grain to feed our animals. And then we're just using the waste byproduct from a cheesery or something, or from lingerie, their way to make a complete diet.
So maybe we'll just talk quickly about the internal structure and some of the other considerations, and then we'll have more of a go around. So I've talked about the having a low or a negative pay differential and supporting the community and thinking of that as part of your core expenses. Of course, one of the, I just want to go back to that just for a second, because for me as a Jew, one of the really important gifts that we have is the idea of giving as a blessing. And some very clever rabbis have discussed this to death, surprise, surprise, and basically came up with the idea that yes, giving is a mitzvah, it's a blessing. Giving with no expectation of return is more of a blessing. Giving anonymously with no expectation of return is the biggest blessing that you can give and receive that way. And so as a concept, that's something that's really important in the way that we do things. And so that's partly why I really hate companies who do this whole, and we donate this much money to this thing, because they're using it as a way of disguising what they're actually doing in their daily ways of making a living. Which is not to say you shouldn't necessarily take credit where credit is due, but you can see where people are using things like that, right? It's sort of like ethics washing, like greenwashing. So that drives a certain amount of what we're doing. The other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was where environmental responsibility fits into this whole structure, because again, it's part of the concept of enough is understanding what your footprint is. And so the footprint that we try to deal with is both our physical on the land footprint, and the reason the brewery will not get physically larger than it is because we have a defined area of the farm that we can use. If we take up anything else, we're taking away land that can be growing food. Or that can be wild areas that is providing habitat for all the other creatures.
It's
that are
industrial
important.
sprawl.
Yeah. The other piece of that is that we could, as Brian was talking about water use, we would be taking more water out of the aquifer than we can justify. Even if we're recycling that water, cleaning that water, putting it back into groundwater, it doesn't matter. We're taking it out in the first place, and we're taking it out from deep and we're applying it to the surface. So that's changing the water systems that we live in. So in order for us to figure out what that means, like we've got to actually look at the environmental system that we're operating within and try to figure out how to ameliorate the uses that we're making of it. So that, there's little things like don't pave the driveway. Paved driveways cause runoff. Asphalt causes really toxic runoff. The more toxic you make that, well, guess what happens further down the line, right? Don't use chlorine in your water because somehow that's got to be taken out again. And all of the water that comes, the surface water that drains off of our place drains into fish-bearing streams, into our most sacred waterway in the lake. We can't do that. That would be wildly irresponsible. Packaging is another big piece of that. As you guys probably know, we don't bottle. We don't can. Cans, they don't get recycled the way glass does. Glass, you take a piece of glass, you melt it down, you make another piece of glass the same size. A tin can comes into several components because half of it's plastic. It does not get 100% made into another new can. So there's more loss and there's more toxic degradation in that whole purpose. So the things that keep us up at night, and Taryn knows all about this because we've had some big discussions about the ethics of packaging and how we do it. We've got these.
What's that company name?
Homme Natural.
There
There
you
she
go.
is. There. Well, actually, really, I do wanted to give you a shout
Bring
out
the
to you
community with
because-
us, right? So.
Because Taryn takes packaging and the issues around that to a really seriously ethical extreme, and does a really good job of thinking through these issues. So we package in these glass bottles, but we put tin caps on them that we cannot reuse. This is a problem. I don't know what to do about that. We're trying to come up with solutions. We've been bending our heads together about this. What do we do with this thing? But these are the questions that you have to keep addressing. So you come up with something. Yeah, we'll use glass bottles. That'll be great. Oh shit! Now we've got this thing. Oh, and you just keep trying, right? So that it's this long and iterative process that gets solved by some other clever being coming up with a new kind of cap.
I'd like to touch on that because you had have to ring my bell as well as far as cultural values are concerned. You said the mitzvah thing, and I think that's important. And I think too that one really interesting Gaelicism is the word galore. Now that's an Irish word, and it means something different in Irish than it does mean over on this side of the water. In Irish, it means enough, and to have enough is amazing. It's just when you don't live with a lot of things. So as an Irish person coming here and seeing the word used galore as a bountiful thing and an overextension of just abundance, it's not right. But it's the way North Americans see things. And it's a different worldview of how things get put together. So we use that in our growth trap strategy as well. Notions about the concept of enough is really important cultural value. And I think that we would do well to listen to those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with saying, is there enough? Do I need it? You don't have to go into over-the-top elephantitis kind of want.
But you can still have good cheese and books and the occasional
kind
chocolate,
of things.
beer,
But it doesn't mean that you have your plates or the tower of soup or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think people generally do actually understand the difference between sufficiency and what my grandfather used to call an elegant sufficiency, and what's just straight out desire and random wanting of stuff that you've been advertised to.
The late Ursula K. Le Guin, ecofeminist.
Yes.
Said, quote, "More than enough is nature."
Oh yeah.
This hurts your waistline.
That's wonderful. Actually, okay, so thank you, because you've given me all these great segues today. This is great. Then before we start just sitting down and talking with everybody, I have another Le Guin quote, actually. This was from receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2014, and she said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But then, so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings." So, with that, let's have a discussion. So,
we talk about
come on in. Let's make
parallel
a talk here.
systems, making capitalism obsolete as you possibly can.
Yeah. What's important to you guys in what you're doing, or where do you see that something needs to shift in what you're personally doing? How's that?
I could see shared ownership, like just in terms of tools, for instance. Everybody's got to have, Home Depot thing, you've got to have your own tack gun and your own saw, and instead of having a tool shed where.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There's a group of farmers in our area that have started a tool library for the things that we don't use that much. Like we've got a
part of
chicken
that, by
plucker.
the way.
It started with the chicken plucker because really nobody needs to have a chicken plucker all
Well, unless
all
you're going to
year
wash your
round.
hair funnily, right?
Yeah. So it started with that. And the idea of a tool library or sharing that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, we think that's really important. I think that people throughout there's things like keyline plows and that, which you might use once, but they're super expensive. And why couldn't that be just shared around with people who are putting things together?
That's one of our next wants for the for the tool library, a keyline plow.
Another thing I think is just a constant thing is we're dealing with older structures, older homes. So you have your electric heat, you have your gas heat. How to kind of, you're trying to sort of make some changes. Like if you were starting anew, it's like, oh gee, I'd make this super eco building and this and that,
Yeah.
and rainwater, and we're hearing these, added on to old structures that are wonderful homes that you don't want to tear down either. So do you guys, I don't know, you have some older structures, do you heat with
Yep.
wood, do you heat, are you on the grid?
We're on the grid, and we heat our house with wood, but the house there's two houses, and the other house is heated with natural gas and a high efficiency furnace. And yeah, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know.
We had our way if two families weren't actually living in it, then we'd probably sell the unit and
Build something
return
way
it
more
back to
ecological.
repair the riparian area once again, right?
Yeah,
But it's a
but it's
useful
being
thing.
used. Yeah.
So
That's the thing, there's a family living it well, you don't want to.
Well, there is the whole argument about it's a greater waste to get rid of a perfectly functional vehicle that really has nothing wrong with it to go and buy a new vehicle that might be an electric vehicle, right? I'm sure everybody hears this. Now, can we justify that? I don't know. Depends on the condition of your car or your house, I guess.
well, when it becomes a little bit more normalized to have electric vehicles around, it'll be a little bit more accessible to people who are in a class bracket like ours.
Yeah. Sorry, I have to sit
Can
down.
I ask a question about,
Yeah.
like, in your 20 years, in my 10, the cost of everything has gone up. So the glass jars we're talking about, the other things. So unfortunately, even wanting to stay at a certain level, you can't, because what I could make 10 years ago
Yep.
couldn't pay for everything now. So there are places where I can, buy more of something in order to actually pay less, but then that's the dance of having more of something. And so when you have enough, but every year you must have to make more to manage living in a world that keeps getting more expensive.
Yeah, that is, no, that's actually a really, really good point. And I can't say I have an answer. I don't think we have an answer to that. It's
But
something
then
that really,
how,
that keeps hitting.
The brewery can only get so big, so at some point, will it not make enough?
Possibly.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of, there's built-in things like price ranging and or price raising for everything that we're doing. Also, the bulk buying of certain things. I think that actually speaks into working more and more within community because we have to share our resources again, and that bulk buying thing and tool libraries and that make a heck of a lot of sense.
And and I also think there's an evolution in there too. So maybe that's not the business doesn't have to look the way it is now, and maybe in another, I have no idea what kind of time frame, but at some point maybe it just doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, I have to admit that ideally I would prefer to be running a nano brewery, selling growlers right on the farm and just serving our local community. But our local community isn't really actually big enough to do that, to make a living. But it would be way better than shipping all over hell and creation. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's also ways that maybe we can evolve the model that we're each using to try to figure out how to adapt to that. And but you're right. Sometimes you have to get up to a certain point to find that sweet spot, and the sweet spot does move. Yeah.
Just so long as that's not governed by people who are wanting the overreaching growth kind of thing, because that's a really insidious kind of thing to look at. There's people who say, oh yeah, you should do this and this and this because these rules are such. It says, well, hold on a second, we're going to change that paradigm a bit and make sure that maybe in a little few years and stuff, maybe we might shrink because it makes more sense to do when we're talking. We already have a value-added thing anyway, so
Yeah.
it's just a matter of we can, and we're already kind of adjusting to that kind of thing too, because there's a huge onslaught of proliferation of these breweries that have come on, and so we said, oh, so they've come up with a bunch of new logos and stuff because what they're doing is not necessarily new. But we said, okay, well, I don't know if consciously we've done this, but we're doing more seasonals. It's new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually change anything that we're doing except that we get excited about doing some marketing and getting more people on, like the
And it's-
notion that we're talking about with the
Haskap
Haskap Beer Month.
Yeah.
So say, well, because we tell that to people, it says, well, that's not a thing, is it? And says, well, now it is. Because it wasn't marketed before, but we can run with it and we can help our friends who grow Haskaps and make sure there is a market for it. So it's coming up with new things, but not necessarily changing our business plan to do it. It's just being more
Shifting
inclusive
sort of
on
within
certain
the
things.
concept. Yeah.
For me, the really sort of edge where I struggle is to find the balance between the feeling of increasing feeling of the urgent need to act in progressive ways
Yeah.
and the need to do thorough and accurate assessments and inventories of available resources in order to do really, truly progressive things.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I really like that.
That's really
Yeah,
interesting because
that's
we really
challenging.
think that to not keep it individualized, but have outreach with different things. And to that end, I hope that I can get a couple more people on board, but I want to do a water audit committee that goes around to all the craft brewers, at least the craft brewers in BC, and talk to them about getting the water meters on, and maybe we can get some grants or something to put these kinds of things together and make sure that we do audits and say, hey, you're using too much resource. It's not about me anymore. It's about the whole of you in a collegial sense to do better. And so we don't want to be the voice in the wilderness. We never wanted to become the voice in the wilderness that we're the only person doing these kind of things. And we were talking about this before, which says there is a lot of people doing other things, and it's up for us to help promote those people as well. Because it's again, we're not the only people doing things. And I think that our whole notion is to push people in a way through inspiration versus fear, because we know what handbasket this society is going into. But if there's not an alternative, like Daniel Ortega used to say when he was a good guy before, he says you have to have something for the revolution to do afterwards. You can't just have a struggle and that's it. You have to have an agrarian project or something that is going to be different from what was. You just can't coup the latest government or notion.
Too bad he didn't stick with that. Yeah.
Well, I am just a visitor here, so I know nothing about this area or the area where you work. But I think that there are concepts talking about culture that can help us to reflect upon, for instance, living well or well-being, or in other native languages like in Quechua or in Aymara, Sumak Kayosai or Sumak Kamaya, which is embedded within a whole different cosmovision.
Yeah.
Now, having that macro, sort of template, which is basically at the cosmos level, but it's reproduced also at the place-based level, right? So then you start to see, how we fit in a sort of distorted matrix that capitalism has created, and how local governments, including indigenous governments, might not be creating the foundations for a sustainable life. And I say this with all due respect for both, cultural groups, generally speaking. So the issue is then, how do we take care of the local and regional biocultural place
Yeah.
when you guys are, by your own means, are creating an emerging culture, which is not taught at universities is place that is teaching you and you fine-tuning with place
Yes.
and making place,
Yes.
right? So what is the local and regional government doing, right? What is that matrix that you have been pointing in terms of let's do, a record of the resources, in projection to the medium and long term, right? What are the ethics that the government, local and regional and national, is promoting? What, the private and public universities are teaching for, the buzzword of sustainability and sustainable development, right? So, because I think that what is happening right now with you, among other examples, few but important, is that the community culture is, giving the best examples than those that can be shown by the university and those who make, you will understand what I'm going to say in Spanish is culo hours. So sitting on, your ass for many hours and thinking that from that place you're going to be proposing alternatives. When in fact what we need is that the university gets closer to the community.
Yeah.
And the community be more, on the side of what now is starting in Canada to emerge like a citizens culture, local culture, indigenous culture, knowledge or culture, and scientific knowledge. So there is not just one type of knowledge.
Yeah.
There are 3 more types of knowledge. And that is important. So the change starts when you start to do the change. But with that, you change your language, you change your view, your connection, your feelings with that place. And then how do we take care of the local and regional biocultural landscape? Are we speaking the same language? Are we everybody sitting with the same view? I think that society at large is fragmenting us, and I think that what we need is to remember, as I used to say in 2005 when I was invited to come to the Okanagan, and say remembering at least means 2 things: bring all those dismembered parts back to where they belong, physically speaking, and that is, the biocultural landscape. And then remembering who we are, because we have forgotten who we are. It's like, the new type of church, postmodern church, is the mall. Everybody goes there, does the ritual, and then they think that, they did well, and then they can buy a lot of things and come back home. So that is my approach to what you're saying, based on experiences that come from the South. And the South meaning you are part of the epistemological South, because you don't belong to,
No.
the northern scientific way of knowledge.
I like that.
The London School of Economics is not going to teach us what you're doing.
No. It's a different forum.
Well, I think a lot of these lessons have come to us from solidarity work from El Salvador, and
Exactly.
so
That is part of
yeah.
it's in Africa, but Africa has also the northern epistemological way of doing it, the
Yeah.
dominant way.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to recognize that there are different knowledge systems embedded.
That's true. There's going to be multi-threads that are going to happen, and we're thinking inside of our own sphere of influence that we can speak to. The institutional things that you're speaking of as well, I think that is it's almost like an interface for us, where it's certainly state-run institutions and things are probably not going to be adaptable to our particular means of activism.
But I think the question of recognizing the different knowledges and learning to be in place is something that is happening a lot more. And the challenge, what's starting, I think, to hit the more mainstream culture through the anti-colonialist challenge, the decolonialist language, that I think it's actually making people in a different sphere think a little bit more about this. And so I have some hope for widening the discussion that way. And I think it's creating some new dialogues where we're getting more fragmented. Within agriculture, in organic agriculture, we're both being siloed and then trying to reach outside of those silos as well and trying to widen that conversation. But really, I think that what you're talking about is recognizing the lessons that the land itself has to teach us. And through that, relearning languages, because there are so many layered on. And in that process is a cultural rebuilding. And I think if we remember that a cultural rebuilding is a political rebuilding at the same time, that those things are intertwined, then we can start making change. And we have maybe a little bit of energy to go out and yell about things at meetings. Because you do have to do a little bit of that, right?
It's interesting about
I have time to.
We've been asked to do lots and lots. We have this is just a kind of a off the top of our head thing that we're doing today. We have more intensive discussions in other places, but we get asked to do speakers tours. Yeah. And do different things, and we say, well, I likened it to an example of, so Rebecca's dad had lived on our property for a time, and there was farming going on all the time, and it influenced the way he spoke. When he moved off of that whole influence about the farming and being in the center of it, really, it kind of got a bit lost, and that's our shared perceptibility as well. We want to make sure that we don't turn into a museum piece, and that we're in the thick of what we're trying to do through our labors.
Sorry, I just need to interrupt briefly because we're running out of time, but I want to actually just pass around briefly. If anybody does want to share their email with anybody else who decides to share their email on the list, we can keep discussing this and get together, tea, coffee, beer, whatever. I'm going to start over here. If you can just pass that around. And unfortunately, we actually do have to close. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.